Hey everyone, it's time to kick off another exciting session of our DevOps office hours. It's May 31st, 2023. My name's Eric Osterman and I'll be your host. I'm the founder and CEO of Cloud Posse. Cloud Posse helps teams conquer AWS using our rock solid blueprints for Terraform. And whether you're starting from scratch or just not satisfied with your current setup, if you book a session with me, go to cloudposse.com/quiz. Answer a few quick questions, and I'll show you exactly what your future can look like. For those of you new to the call, don't worry, our format's very informal. My goal is to answer your questions. If you're curious about Cloud Posse or any of our open source tools and modules, this is a great place to ask. For those joining us through our podcast or YouTube channel, we host these calls every week, so don't miss out. Register for these live and interactive sessions by going to cloudposse.com/quiz. Again, that's cloudposse.com/quiz. So with that said, let's head over to some announcements. Actually, one more thing I forgot to say. Our call today is recorded. We'll be posting a recording of this session to our YouTube channel. So if you want to help and support what we do over here, please hit those like and subscribe buttons. It helps us out a great deal. Just go to youtube.com/cloudposse. Again, youtube.com/cloudposse. All right, so my announcements. What? Oh, I added them to the wrong page. Oh, well, here are my announcements. First one is, 15 years ago, we would have never imagined this would happen, but now it's very much the reality. And Microsoft has made their own distribution of Linux for the Azure cloud, kind of like Amazon has Amazon Linux. This is a distribution managed by them. So yeah, I'd like to say it's surprising, but it's not surprising anymore, given how much support Microsoft has had in Linux. The next one is, yet another smaller boutique password manager has fallen. Keepass, I've seen it around before. Apparently, the passwords are kept in clear text within memory, so very easy to obtain. And obviously, the kingdom will fall once you have that master password. Another one I was just reading before lunch here was apparently a severe flaw in Google's Cloud SQL was exposed. If you already have a basic Cloud SQL user access, you could ultimately escalate to a full-fledged sysadmin on Cloud SQL. So heads up. Jeremy on my team shared this tool. Linux is all about small, little purposeful utilities that do one thing well, and pipelining, right? So command pipe, other command pipe. So this is an easy way to pipe command line output into some AI engine. I haven't looked into which LLMs it supports, but it looks like OpenAI and local AI. So what's cool about this is, you can give it a prompt and then give it some input and get the output of the suggestions. All right. Anyone doing Terraform has undoubtedly noticed probably the new v5 provider was released. I think the most sound advice is this one here. Might not be a bad idea to wait until a couple versions of or patch releases have come out. The first release of these major provider changes often have some bugs. Now, if you are undertaking that, make sure you are aware of the official upgrade guide for the provider. And this is interesting. Oh, this is under providers. I didn't realize there was a way to, under the registry, officially promote like other documentation, like an upgrade guide. So that's nice. Anyone already done this and run into some gotchas? What do you have to share? All right, I know we're undertaking this across all of our hundreds of modules. I think this should complete in the next week or so. So expect to see V5 support rolling out. I know we run into consistent patterns of problems. Unfortunately, the developer working on that isn't on the call, so I can't relay.
Yeah, I know there was, when they initially released it, there was a problem where if tags was null, the provider like actually panicked and crashed, and they released 5.01 to address that issue.
Wow. Funny that
So
yeah, and props that they fixed it quickly. Kind of funny that a bug like that would only rear its head after release.
yeah, it seems like that's an easy unit test.
Yeah. Hopefully that was the follow-up action there. All right. Yeah, well, let's see, what were the highlights from the V5 upgrade?
Pretty much the removal of VPC, EC2 Classic and the associated things with VPC and stuff.
Macy Classic.
And they cleaned up the WAF and a couple other resources. If I'm not wrong, like there was even a thing with, and it's a good example with the ECS provider, capacity provider or something, not it was implemented wrong in Terraform because it didn't support 0 as a time off or something. The minimum was 1, and that was a breaking change, so they added it now. Like it's not, yeah, the instance warm up period. It's not that big of a change for a provider. Like, yeah, they eliminated the EC2 Classic and the associated VPC resources, and that requires a bunch of tweaking, but I don't know, it feels like one of the smaller provider updates.
Well, yeah, well, except, I mean, we've been psychologically prepped for the S3 changes for a long time, but that's a biggie.
Yeah, I would say maybe it doesn't seem that big bang, but when you look, there's a list of like 50 some odd breaking changes. And while we probably don't use most of them because a lot of them are, like you said, EC2 Classic and some other things, there's still 50 some odd breaking changes or something like that to make sure that you don't use any of those things before you upgrade.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks for that. All right, invoice summaries are now available. This has been pretty annoying in AWS, you know, when you have a multi-account architecture with 20 plus accounts and getting these invoices, it's like, you know, 30, 40 pages of scrolling to go through it. So I welcome any kind of summarization that they can do.
It's really annoying to set up, though. You have to create a support ticket.
Really?
If you click the help page, it links you to, like, I expected a checkbox in the consolidated, in the payer account or something, but no, it's a whole thing.
Very often, this is where Amazon break their whole rule, and even Bezos's like original message of you can do things via the API. A lot of billing related stuff you have to do via tickets. It's not API'd, not even in the interface.
It's probably excuse me, an eventual thing, because like it's like service quotas, like you could never request an update for those through the API, and then eventually they added them to the API. So it's, I bet at some point, sometime in the distant future, we'll have a way to do this programmatically.
Yeah. Well, next announcement was just honorable mention. Another one of the 16 best tools. A lot of these posts. Honorable mention was, of course, I had to bring it up because Atmos was mentioned near the bottom of the list. However, I don't necessarily stand by all the other suggestions, so I don't know. Take the list with a grain of salt. If you like salt, Atmos is it. All right. This one here hits me close to home. I get just countless emails that are so clearly written by GPT because they're just overly formal, pretty much follow the same format. You know, I really don't mind you using GPT to send me an email, but just tailor the prompt a little bit, you know, make it short, discreet, to the point, business-like English, and it'll work much better. And last one, I haven't had a chance to kick the tires on this yet, but I'm excited to try this. So if you can get the data into a Postgres database, you can now ask questions of that data through ChatGPT somehow. I don't believe Supabase is required. I believe Supabase has a Postgres compatible API. So therefore using the plugin for Postgres would work with Supabase, is my assertion. All right. Any other news this week? That's all I got.
I pasted two things, EKS 1.27 and AppSync merged APIs.
All right, let's see here. Chat. All right, the Kubernetes 1.27. As we've talked recently, these are now so frequent, I just kind of skim over them. Let's see, what does anything stand out with 127?
For me, I haven't fully looked into it. For me, there's a kubelet thing. I'm looking if it's here now. They tweak some performance settings, and for really big nodes, you will see better performance. But I'm not fully up to date with this.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
At the top, there's usually one that's changes since, and then they have, yeah, like the old.
In the announcement, they also probably link to the AWS blog post that they did, and they highlight the changes. Maybe it's there too.
Yeah,
this is the one I usually look like.
AWS normally good about, EKS I think is probably the worst of the Kubernetes platforms, to be honest, compared to Azure and Google, but they are good about listing what the breaking changes are in their blogs, because that's where it hits people with like deprecations and things.
Yeah, it's in the blog post. Raise the default API query per second limits for kubelet. It's still in early testing with my customers, but we've seen some early performance improvements. Again, still to be validated.
all right. I'll share that link here as well. It's not letting me copy and paste for some reason. Never mind. Then the next. Announcing AWS AppSync merged APIs for GraphQL Federation. Merged API is a single GraphQL API exposed from multiple source GraphQL APIs, representing different services or data sources.
Yeah, this is a super big deal if you're doing any GraphQL. So this is pretty much Apollo Federation, but built by AWS. The idea is that, so GraphQL allows you to have one API for everything, which is really, really nice. And AppSync allows native connections to DynamoDB and Aurora, I think, and a bunch of other resources. It's a really nice managed GraphQL. But the problem was you could only have one AppSync endpoint. So yay, merge all your APIs into one GraphQL endpoint. But you've got to manage all that in a single account or do some Lambda voodoo. If you click the how to blog link, they have a nicer graph. So basically, with merge APIs, I think you can merge up to 10 GraphQL APIs into a single API, which means you will finally be able to do stuff like, okay, like it's on the screen right now, like the Books API has their own API in their own AWS account. They can be independent. They're not gonna fight over the API definition and all that. GraphQL Federation, schema stitching, whatever. You don't want to go into the history of schema stitching and federation and what a mess that is. But this was highly expected. Like people really wanted this. It's now released. It seems to be a pretty good implementation. Like we're happy with it, and it makes AppSync into a really, really mature service. Like AppSync was a great service even before this. With this, it got elevated to, yeah, it's awesome.
Very cool. That sounds great. Yeah. So essentially, you can manage also this on a permissions level while giving teams their own ability to manage their GraphQL endpoints.
What do you mean by permissions?
Can you control what level of IAM permissions can you do at the merged API level? Or all the permissions enforced down at the lower level of Graph API? Like what?
Oh, I got it. Yeah, they're defined at the lower level, at the field level, actually. They integrate with Cognito and a bunch of other things. There's, I think if you search for @auth, I think maybe they have something in the blog post. Let me find the link.
Vlad, do you know, is this just for AppSync managed GraphQL? Or if you had a set of GraphQL services that are across different, not managed with AppSync. So like, in
Like if you're
Kubernetes or in ECS.
an Apollo server or something like that.
Yeah. Is this an
Yes.
actual replacement for Apollo, or is it, Apollo's federation for AppSync? That's what I'm
It's
interested in.
just AppSync. They do in the blog post, they actually, in the exact blog post that Eric has, they tackle this. They had a thing you could run yourself and do some federation with Apollo and a bunch of other things. But no, this is just for AppSync.
Gotcha.
And I found the link thingy for the path. AppSync is pretty well integrated into the whole AWS ecosystem. Like the Cognito integration is pretty nice. So if the user has, I don't know what group, they can access this particular thing in the GraphQL API. And it's just an annotation in the definition.
Cool. Thanks for.
Yeah, I think like this is good for definitely like, or it's straightforward, I should say, for the simple use cases of merging multiple APIs. I think it's going to get really complicated when, and I know it mentions it in the blog post, but managing it and federating it around things where there are overlapping types and mutation and query names and those kinds of things are going to get tricky, or you're going to have to coordinate it somehow to make sure that one API doesn't define get all as an example. Like you have to actually specify like what you're getting all of. I'm just giving like a simple example, and I know it says like one can say that they're the canonical version of that with an attribute with an annotation, but what if both of them do that, etc. Like I think there's still some coordination to be had. It's not a panacea, but it's still a step in the right direction for sure.
All right. All right. Well, a bunch of questions were there any other announcements before I move on to questions in our Slack?
not a question, but to call it out. Jim mentioned this, and I'll piggyback on this question. Somebody mentioned that EKS is the worst K8s managed service among the various clouds, and I'd love to have a discussion on that and hear what people's thoughts were. Personally, I know that Google Cloud's Kubernetes offering managed service is, definitely up there, and people really like it. But I'm surprised to hear that AWS is the worst. But we could save that for after questions. I just wanted to not let it get lost in the chat.
Well, otherwise we have to reintroduce it since we started. Let's see if there's any takers.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned it. It was more from a day-to-day management standpoint. So it's not everything about the platform. Azure has, shockingly to all of us that have been in the industry a long time, have really advanced when it comes to things on Linux, especially, but also on things relating to DevOps and stuff. So Azure DevOps has gone very far forward. Had something to do with them buying GitHub, maybe. But the upgrade processes, for example, are obviously Google's always going to be ahead. Kubernetes is their thing, right? But the upgrade processes are, if compared to Azure, are a lot better on Azure. The compliance side, I deal with that a lot, is way better on Google and Azure. Google, everything's in Go in Kubernetes, right? And Go's crypto management is different than other services. It doesn't use anything from the OS. Well, the way that you compile crypto on Go to be secure is using something called boring crypto. It just happens Google made it. So all their stuff is automatically more secure from a Go standpoint. Azure adopted the same thing. Upgrade procedures, Azure and Google both give much more robust ways of doing managed upgrades. I met with Amazon a few months ago, and they are working on that. So I think it's in one of the upcoming releases. They're going to have a lot of improvements on more options on how to do rolling upgrades to the clusters. It's a lot of these day-to-day management things and security, and even documentation around, normally for me, it's around security compliance things, where the other clouds are a lot further ahead, typically, than Amazon. And if anybody's going through an audit like, say, FedRAMP, Amazon's blog is, this is not necessarily the EKS developer's fault, this is a marketing person's fault. Their blog is a lie. It says that Amazon EKS is FedRAMP high. It's not. Now, technically it has the stamp, but it's not. You have to do a lot of work to get to that point. Yeah, that's where my basis of that came from. It was around experience with doing upgrades and around experience with security and compliance functionality, where I see Azure and Google far ahead.
We're FedRAMP approved at IL4 using AWS, and we never had any problems. We just went through our second audit, in fact, and we never had any issues with it. So that's surprising.
Yeah. Well, the EKS itself, yeah, but you had to build. I assume you had to build your own armies to get those.
We use the control plane. We build our own workers, and we do our own method of hardening those devices to the STIG standards. But
yeah, exactly. So you had experience doing that. So out the box, it was not definitely, you had to go build your own images. We went through it.
We start out with the AMI EKS image first, and then we harden it. But
yeah, we've done the same. And we've done this more recently. So the standards have gotten a bit harder. So there were a bunch of things flagged. And in the end, they got flagged by an auditor or scanner. And we said, look, we have to defer that to Amazon. Well, they're not doing this right. It's like, well, it's still Amazon's responsibility. So we also got, our authorization. This happens with any big vendor, right? They're really big. A lot of people use them, so they can get by with doing certain things, not doing certain things. So it's still definitely possible to get the compliance. What I meant was that Azure and Google have those things just out the box. They offer a FIPS image by default. It's just there, just as an example.
Yeah, but they're going to have to keep. Okay, that's interesting. That's a curious conversation to have. Then, because as you know, I don't know if you guys do this, but we have our stuff scanned once a week, and we come up with vulnerabilities that have to be updated once a week. So are you stating that what Azure or Google does on the workers is that at least once a week they go and they reharden and roll your.
Oh yeah, I mean, we've got find me on the Slack. We can talk about it more. But I wasn't meaning the CVEs. They are a bit more ahead on CVEs as well. But no, I was meaning the FIPS part was one part of that, which is not.
I'll give you. I don't know where to. Are you just talking about in the Slack channel for?
I'm on their Slack, so Sean or Robert, if you want to DM me, or we can start chatting on the channels, so we don't take the whole meeting on and talk about.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
The FIPS aspects of it were a lot easier on Amazon and Google. The documentation around FedRAMP and controls was a bit better as well.
Because even on our commercial side, we don't use managed workers. We control our own workers. So maybe that's where the disparity is between.
No, we're not for our production environment. We're not using managed workers either. It was the need to go and they said, okay, if you boot up a base EKS cluster, you're good to go. FedRAMP High. I'm like, I know that all of our services we have to secure further. That's our responsibility, but it's not, because you need to go and harden the image yourself, right? Yeah. They don't provide a hardened image. The other vendors do. That's just the very first thing we encountered. And then there were some other things like that we encountered. So it's not drastic differences. The upgrade procedures were definitely better on Azure and Google. That is where they were ahead. But at EKS, they know that. So in talking to one of the EKS product managers, they say, yeah, we're working on giving more options around the upgrade methods. So that should improve.
I have a stupid question. Well, so when it goes with something like Bottle Rocket, what more needs to be hardened with something that is so stripped down and so hardened already?
Well, that's interesting, is because Bottle Rocket, this is where government stuff is harder. In government space, you need something called FIPS. It's like FIP, and you need FIPS, not FIPS compliance. This might bore a lot of people, but have you ever heard the term FIPS? There's two types of FIPS. There's FIPS compliant, and there's FIPS valid. You have to be FIPS valid. It's kind of like the organic label on food. So the food you get from your local farmer that you know personally, and you know he doesn't spray it, it's probably organic, but it didn't have that stamp on it, right? But you trust it's organic because you know the guy. But you have to pay the government to get that organic stamp. So FIPS valid means that vendors such as Red Hat or Amazon have gone to the government, given them money, and said, check this stuff and validate it. So you're really, really restricted on what you can use.
Yeah.
So like for Go, you have to use boring crypto pretty much, or pay some third-party vendor to get Go. Amazon, the EKS platform itself, the kubelet, all that stuff is not running in FIPS mode because Amazon don't do that. Azure and others do. So we got flagged for that, and we said, hey, it's not our problem, it's Google's. It's Amazon's. There's little things like that. Bottle Rocket, for whatever reason, FIPS isn't always the most secure. FIPS is a standard set, and it's a few years behind. So Bottle Rocket doesn't incorporate FIPS. It's focused purely on security of what's the most secure thing right now, not on the compliance part of it. So Bottle Rocket doesn't actually meet those controls. It also doesn't meet EIS controls and state controls.
It's on their roadmap though. That's what I just posted here. They're working on getting Bottle Rocket FIPS certified.
That would be awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. Once you start doing FedRAMP, you'll also quickly realize that you're severely burdened with the compliance standards of only working with FedRAMP qualified services as well. And that's how FedRAMP is able to determine or able to keep people on the same page, at least from a logical perspective, to make sure that the people who are FedRAMP qualified or approved are not going and using services outside that FedRAMP umbrella. So it's and typically all the services, as far as we've been able to tell, all services who get FedRAMP qualified, if you integrate with them, you're basically integrating with everybody with old software, because the standards is always behind by like probably 2 to 3 to 5 years. It's unfortunate. We had a situation, in fact, where we're using a firewall. I don't know if I should say this, but anyways, we're using a firewall that we upgraded the FIPS componentry to the latest, and then we got dinged for that because it wasn't using the version that FIPS requires, or that the STIG requires. So instead of using the latest and the greatest, and typically would be deemed as the best, we had to downgrade because it wasn't in compliance with what FedRAMP was requiring. So
and sometimes the government would rather you have a FIPS valid module than one with a CVE fixed in it, which is an odd state of affairs, but it's true. Yeah, it's not that easy. there's no checkbox for it. There's always debates, and I have a daily meeting for this. But
What's the long-term fix for this? I mean, I think this is
You
probably.
wait, you wait till they update the STIG, and then you will update your stuff.
it's all risk. It's all risk based, right? If the CVE is fairly low risk and you have other mitigating controls, then you have to document that.
Yeah, you
If it was
just
something like Redshift or something like some crazy exploit, it'd be a different story. But if it's just, a minor, basically FedRAMP and many other compliances out there state that you can't have any critical, you have to fix every critical and high-end CVE within 30 days, period. Sometimes those CVEs are completely invalid, in which case you need to qualify with documentation of why they're invalid.
And then you have to get approval from the person or the people who are your sponsors.
Yeah.
It's not uncommon actually to get a high CVE, but because the way your environment might be, for instance, that high really is not the big of a deal. You're behind the Amazon firewall, you're behind your own firewall, you're behind several load balancers, and it's only one port that's affected, that kind of thing. And you have to go to the sponsor and you have to say, hey, we just had a high finding come through, but this is this, and this mitigates it down to something else that we consider a medium. Are you okay with that? And as long as your sponsor is okay with it, then they'll downgrade it and you can move forward where you have a much longer period of time to be able to fix that problem, or just forget about it. It's always on what's called a POAM. So
yeah, basically compliance and security don't always align, right? Sometimes you have to do stuff just to check the compliance box, and it doesn't even affect security. It looks like a few of us on here have dealt with FedRAMP. We could probably have a whole week conference talking about the ins and outs and difficulties of FedRAMP.
I just want to make a point, like higher level, like one step higher level than all of this, is that at the end of the day, Eric, when you said what's the long-term solution for this, the problem is that there's too much bureaucracy and too many crazy layers of people who put regulations in and expect adherence to letter of the law rather than spirit of the law when it comes to auditing and standards and all of those things. And it's not just FIPS or FedRAMP, type things. It's in NIST, it's in CIS, it's in HIPAA, it's in PCI, it's in every one of the standards I've ever dealt with. And at the end of the day, it's about doing what's most secure for your business, and then trying to explain it and document it away to the auditors of why you did it that way, so that they can check the box and say that you've done what you should do for the compliance piece. And it's a dance that is not often beneficial for any reason other than to check a box in a certification or a standard that says you adhere to something, which is a shame, because that gets away from what the spirit of all of these things are.
Yeah, spirit of the control is the term we use a lot, our advisors use. And we got lucky that for our earlier rounds, we had good auditors that actually looked at, okay, you've met the spirit of the control. They didn't get obsessive about the word involved.
Yeah, I've had both, unfortunately.
The only thing I would say to that, though, that we've had happen is that we've had good auditors, but then it goes up to DISA or whoever the qualifying party is. We've actually had them push back on the spirit of that stuff. I was in the military I'm coming up on 20 years now, so I've had lots of federal service, and unfortunately, I've seen this in all kinds of different places. The government's just, they don't know what they're doing usually, and it's usually the lowest bid wins the race. And you can definitely tell by FedRAMP standards, and by when you're in the calls with DISA and the approving parties and stuff, you can definitely tell that they don't always know what they're talking about, and it's just an unfortunate fact that it is what it is. So it's something you got to deal with if you're going to be FedRAMP approved or any of these other audits. I would say the federal audits are usually, in my opinion, the worst when it comes to this. It's just something you got to deal with. It's very maddening.
Yeah, the more recent thing in that space, which I think y'all have covered in some of y'all's sessions, are things around supply chain, like using cosign or other things like that. Then the last year they've added adding a lot more controls around supply chain. That's where we had to do a lot more work that I've talked to other people in the past they haven't had to do around, really detailed digital signatures. And that's also an area where we have some issues open with Amazon because they don't have signatures on their images.
Oh yeah, we talked about that recently.
Yeah.
That's not
You
really.
have to ping in a channel or have a compliance channel or something on the sweetops
Yeah,
channel.
that would be a good one. I'm surprised. I guess we haven't created a compliance channel, but we should. I'll make note of that. Nena, can you remind me about that later?
Yeah.
All right. Well, yeah, let's get to some other questions. That was a good conversation. Went really deep on that. I got a lot out of that. So let's see here. Jonathan Eunice asks, any thoughts or experience with BastionZero, another of the we secure your dev and ops connections contenders to the teleport and strong DM Zscaler type solutions. I haven't heard personally of BastionZero, so I'd be curious to learn about it too.
It's yet another zero trust security solution out there. I haven't actually used it, but I've read about it. It just seems like there are so many like Me Too players in this space that I don't really know what each new one brings to the table. It's really hard to differentiate among them.
Which would concern.
In this case, what I understand is that if you go with a teleport or whatever their SaaS service, that basically it's zero trust, except you have to have almost infinite trust in the service. If strong DM or teleport if their service is compromised, they hold the keys and you're basically up the creek. Whereas BastionZero doesn't hold the original keys. They have a fairly interesting, I don't know how important, but fairly interesting approach, which doesn't require them to hold the original keys. And so they're not trying to be your IDP. They're trying to be a secondary. I was just wondering if anyone, so we continue our journey of looking around for one of these that will be, inexpensive enough, easy enough to deploy, functional enough. And I just, if anyone had experience, I thought that would be useful.
I've never even seen these guys before, so I don't know that we'd have a use case for them because we don't allow any. This looks like it's all about remote access. Is that accurate?
Yeah, and it's SaaS based.
Yeah, so I think that's very fair.
Yeah, we don't allow remote access into our worker nodes, and we're 100% Kubernetes. So I don't know that we'd be able to even test this out, but it looks interesting.
So how do you, if you don't have remote access, you have someone on site in an AWS data center, or how does that work?
I mean, we get remote access. We don't do it through the normal means. We will use Kubernetes as an enter to get into our nodes through the Kubernetes infrastructure. So we don't, and if we can't get, I think we recently enabled SSM on our hosts. Actually, I'm not on the infrastructure team, so I'm not 100% sure if that's true or not. But we typically, if we need access to a host, which we don't typically need access to a host, then we'll use NSEnter. Or if you're into Crew, I don't know if you know what Kubernetes Crew is, or kube-control Crew. Crew is a plugin manager. If you look for Node Shell, you can use Node Shell through the Kubernetes control plane to get to your hosts.
Well,
If
you
you
then
Looks like I have more research to do.
I'm a huge CLI guy, so I don't use Lens. I think Lens is a cop-out, but Lens will give you the ability to get remote access to your nodes as well. It uses the same concept.
But only if you have network access to those private subnets that your Kubernetes stuff is sitting on, which that's part of the main reason that these solutions exist. So you don't have to grant, you don't actually have to grant network access to those pieces. I also just wanted to make a comment. I'm sorry, whoever that was that brought this up, but Teleport 100% supports SAML as a third party, supports SAML as an authentication provider. That's how we've set it up for our customers. So you definitely can use Okta or Google or whatever the IDP you're using for your authentication into into your gravitational or into your teleport setup there. So I'm not sure if there's a misconception on what you were saying before, or maybe I misunderstood what you were saying about it.
Yeah, we use SSL authentication with our CLI tools as well. I don't know how many people do that, but all of our stuff is all SSO integration. We don't use any really special tools for that, really. It's pretty cool how we've got things set up. So,
All right, let's see the next question we had here. Oops, I'm looking in the wrong place here. So Jonathan, you followed up. Thanks for that. Our conversation last week. You were trying to get the node age in Datadog, and we're confused by the numbers, but looked like there were a few factors that that made it less than obvious. So it was indeed seconds. You mentioned that the metrics there, but it was inflated because each Fargate pod, I guess, are you saying that each Fargate pod acts as a node? So then since those pods are online longer, your numbers were much greater than you anticipated. So when you filtered out all the Fargate nodes, all the Fargate pods, you got a number that represented your actual workloads.
Not
Yeah,
pods,
exactly.
right? But the actual like Fargate, the nodes that are underlying running Fargate.
Right.
But
so that
one, right? Fargate, there's one Fargate node for each Fargate pod, would be my assertion, because
No, there's an actual in the Kubernetes cluster that actually runs that, even though Fargate is serverless, quote unquote, there's a real Kubernetes cluster there that is like waiting for those loads to exist. So there are actually like nodes underlying to service those requests as they come in.
understood. I just thought that
Not exactly. So if you have one Fargate pod and you do kubectl list nodes, you're gonna see a node that is Fargate dash whatever, and that's a node
Exactly.
from the Kubernetes point of view. What AWS does on the backend and what they do, that's a completely different thing. But Kubernetes does see it as a node, and it is a real node, which is a whole thing.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
But therefore, if you have 10 pods, you have 10 nodes.
right.
Yes.
And so basically we filter out the Fargate ones in most contexts. It's not important to us. It's really a part of the control plane, but in consideration of the metrics coming back through Datadog, it was absolutely, and I think Matt and Vlad both nailed it as to, what we needed to look at. So after their comments, it was just a couple of minutes to like, oh, okay, and get it cleared up. So I thank you for your insights.
That's cool.
So
So
as a side note, I also imagine this is why Fargate spot is not a thing for EKS on Fargate. Kubernetes gets, I wouldn't say cranky, but it's very, very sensitive if you create and delete a bunch of nodes. And yeah, that's not ideal. Like EKS can take it because EKS doesn't run on etcd. I have no inside information, but I assume that's a reason.
yeah, that's an interesting insight. I hadn't thought of that.
Kubernetes is very, very cranky around scaling.
So how's your age looking like now that you filtered out all those Fargate node pods?
Exactly right. And we can now put monitors on node age. The graphs look great. And most importantly, the monitors can be effective. We don't really have very many old nodes in production, and it's usually a degenerate case when they get old. So knowing that quickly is helpful.
What is the monitor you wanted to have?
Just if the age gets more than some, but 3 days, what have you, 2 days, that it's very likely it's a problem with provisioning or Carpenter. It's not in a good state.
Okay, that's a good one. There was a previous discussion we also had, and I think this is what Alex Atkinson's following up on, was whether or not to use, I forget exactly the prompts before, it was something like whether or not to use Terraform outputs or store things in SSM or elsewhere. But I guess there was recently a platform engineering webinar going on, and Amazon recommends parameter store.
Yeah, it was me to ask that. It's interesting they're mentioning parameter store. I couldn't find the presentation, but many years ago, Amazon did a presentation on how they manage, obviously not using Terraform, but how they manage all of their configs, basically how they do the equivalent of GitOps. And they were at the time keeping every config for their entire Amazon console in files in S3 that just got reread every 30 seconds. So kind of a GitOps pattern of reading changes. Interesting that they're mentioning parameter store here. Yeah, thanks.
Cool. Let's see, yeah, Venkata shared the provider update. We
some puzzlement over that. Parameter store, AWS, store your Terraform outputs in an account and region specific storage. Just seems like a dead end to me, but this is just one person's reaction.
Well, that's why we haven't adopted parameter stores, because you can't share parameter store across accounts. It's specific to that account. I don't think there is a way to share parameter store, right?
Well, I mean, we access parameter store across accounts in our organization all the time, but
Oh, you do? Okay.
you know, having it also means that when we use parameter store, we're either deploying the same values in different regions, or even worse, across accounts. So now what happens when you've duplicated those values or replicated them in different accounts and different regions? What's truth? You know, it just doesn't strike me as the type of storage you would choose for that application. You know, you could store things in lots of places. Why that? It wouldn't be my first go-to, and I'd have some heartaches with it.
So do you have a preference? What is your source of truth?
Well, I think when you're talking key value, you start looking at things like a service mesh. But I don't want to overstate my maturity in this area. I'm early journey in this path, and I struggle with other uses of parameter store because I'm actually in limited operations managing the same values of different kinds in that same way. And I can't imagine doing that with anything related to Terraform State. You know, with Terraform State, we're, like many members of this community, I think, using S3 and DynamoDB for locking. And so we have a region problem. We have the same kind of, you know, region and account problem that everybody else would have with an S3 bucket based system. But if it was just like outputs and you wanted something to access, I would think to turn to something like console or another key value, you know, etcd or some other.
Yeah, but Google aren't going to promote. I mean, Amazon aren't going to promote that. They're going to promote their service. So
It's
Yeah,
a
but
hard
parameter
problem
store,
to
yeah.
solve, actually. It's a really hard problem to solve. We're in the same boat right now, trying to figure out how we're going to do it as well. The region issue that you brought up is a big deal. The way that architecturally is going to, your architecture is going to make a big difference on how you decide that you're going to do it. One of the things we're looking at potentially using is HashiCorp Vault. But this is something that other people and other teams in my company are evangelizing, and I'm a little trepidatious about it because you're talking about potentially putting a bunch of crown jewel secrets in a SaaS service somewhere. And is that really where you want to put your source of truth? And in my personal opinion, that's not the best place to do that. But it's a hard problem to solve. So I don't think it's anything that anybody in a meeting in this type of forum would ever be able to come up with a solid solution on how that would or should work in your environment.
the one thing that doesn't often come up in these discussions when people are proposing stuff is what are potentially all the different ways you're going to consume the data and the type of users. Like my world's a bit more complex than some, maybe, because I have a engineering department with 1,000 users and they all might need to reference Terraform outputs. So I'm not just dealing with one way to read it. So I want to make it very, very accessible. And if I throw a console in or even a parameter store in, the console even more so, I'm dealing with, okay, I need to manage the authentication of that, the network access, yada, yada, yada. Which is why in our case, because Terraform outputs don't change regularly, we are looking at just doing a GitOps based way and having it just write to Git because everybody has access to Git. And we're not dealing with secrets then. This is just normal TF output, not sensitive values. Secrets are managed differently. For us, so we completely separate normal containers.
I think ultimately, and the thing I've been trying to get my team to get on board with is we do both. We have KV values as well as secrets, but they're all coming from Terraform. And the thing I think that we're looking for is how to provide a good, solid source of truth, API driven, available to everybody with the proper permissions to whichever set of permissions they should be allowed to be to have. And it's a hard problem to solve. We're architecting it right now. We really haven't come up with a good solid solution for everything yet.
Yeah, I think the problem, as you're describing it, is you're actually conflating probably two different things, and one is secrets management, and the other one is configuration data storage, right? Or dependent configuration data. And sometimes they may be the same thing, but by trying to solve both problems with the same solution, you're making the problem even harder, probably than it already is.
No, that's interesting because that concept has been broached, but the way we're looking at it is that what is a key value pair versus a secret key value pair? Nothing other than one shouldn't be seen and one can be seen. They're key value pairs nonetheless. So we've opted to just say, we'll just put everything in a secret place. It's all key values and it's all in a place that could be accessible by the right parties. One of the reasons why using something like HashiCorp Vault is so appealing is because the API already has a good security model behind it.
Yep.
And we can do things with which we could tier the data such that only certain paths can be accessible by certain people within that security model. And that seems like it would work really well for us. Again, my pushback is that, yeah, cool. But what if they go down?
Yeah, that's why I've stayed away from right now. We have some use of console but longer term, I actually don't want to use a console because it's another service I have to maintain, keep online continually. I have to patch, I have to update. I've got CVEs, I've got FIPS. I have all these things I have to do to add this service. And I'm like, okay, is there a cloud native way I can store this? Or can I just dump it in S3 or parameter store or even Git? In our case, our configs, we aren't sensitive. So I don't care if all of our engineers have all the config outputs. So we're keeping our secret problem totally separate, right? I'm not even let's talk about our secret problem because I probably would get in trouble for talking about how we manage secrets. So, but for our key values, we have them in a key value store right now, but I'm inclined just for us to go to GitOps, have the bot be allowed to auto merge the outputs and from Atlantis and that's it. Or even just write to S3 and even just write it in the standard Terraform output JSON format. Then it's a standard format that people know how to read.
For what it's worth, people, I know you were talking about it separately, but at the end of the day, S3 is a KV store.
Yep.
Like that is what it is, right? It's just that you can store much larger data in the V part of the KV store.
Well, the older folks on the phone would say Unix philosophies, right? It's a file.
Yeah.
Etc directory is a bunch of key value stores if you want it to be.
Yeah.
But again, everyone's going to have a different use case. And I think that's what's interesting about this space is while it's certainly fair for us to say, I mean, I can very easily say, well, we're just going to put all of our secret and non-secret data in a secret storage. That won't work for everybody. And that's for each engineer to look at their specific situation and determine what works best for them. This is That's why, in my personal opinion, that's why this space is so complicated, because everybody's infrastructure is different. You got to think about the management of things. You got to think about the security of things. You got to think about the network of things, the access in different regions of things, availability zones, etc. Will it sync here? Will it sync there? Does it need to be synced? It's hard. It's a hard problem to solve.
All right. Well, let's get to one last question here before we wrap things up for today. I think it's something you asked, Sean. Any opinions on SigNoz, the open source version, as an alternative to build your own or Datadog? It's up to 13,000 stars on GitHub. I don't know anything about this, so I'd also like to learn. Anybody?
Well, interesting.
I know they have.
Stop
I know
building
they have a
your
paid
own
version.
monitoring. You're not gonna be able to operate it properly.
What was that?
Stop
again?
building your own monitoring. You're not gonna be able to operate it properly. The stupid trend of we're not gonna pay Datadog, we're gonna run our own Prometheus is such a knee-jerk reaction that ignores the people cost, and it really grinds my gears.
I agree with you completely. Up until a certain scale.
Yeah, I was going to say.
I may be hitting that scale. I know GitLab, who I got a lot of respect for a lot of their work, especially the fact that all of their docs, including their internal employee docs, are public. They acquired OpsTrace, which was an open source project. They didn't acquire, they employed all the people working on it, which was aiming to do kind of the same thing as SigNoz. It was built on Loki and Thanos or something like that. And they needed to have a very large scale metric system for all their customers, at which point they'd be losing money if they use Datadog. So they started to build their own. I want to stick with Datadog, but I'm looking at alternatives, just weighing the costs and benefits against the different options out there. We do use Thanos already to a certain degree, but yeah.
Datadog for us was cost prohibitive. There was no way. It was way too expensive for us to be able to do that. And there was nothing else out there that we could use that was as good as what we at least currently can do and have the right cost. So we still just implement our own stuff, and we don't have any problems with it right now, but we're constantly looking.
Are you doing kind of standard Prometheus, Grafana, Elk, or something?
Yeah, we use Prometheus, Alert Manager, Grafana with Loki, and we use the logging operator behind Loki so that we don't have to deal with Promtail. And that's working out pretty well. We have some scaling things we're working through right now, but it's working well enough at this point that we don't have any problems. And then we integrate with PagerDuty for our alerting stack. So we don't have any problems right now, really. I shouldn't say we don't have any problems. We have things that we need to tune. That's not a problem with the stack. That's a problem with the lack of time and the size of our team to go in and tune. But my belief is it wouldn't matter if we were using Datadog or anything else. That tuning factor would still be there. So
part of our problem, which maybe I'll ask another week, is how people have scaled Prometheus, not for the reporting side, but when you have such a huge number of metrics, the default Prometheus deployment model does not work if you have a huge amount of metrics. You have to distribute it somehow, not for storage, but just for scraping. But that's a longer discussion. I think I'm gonna ask that for a future one. Our Prometheus server was getting to like 50 gigs in size. So
in a day, or over what period of time?
Pretty quickly. We have a huge number of metrics. So
for anybody who follows the Pragmatic Engineer, I'm not sure if it is behind a paywall or not. It's not. There was that big recent thing about one of Datadog's customers being 65 million a year. Yeah, it was Coinbase. But one of the interesting things that the Pragmatic Engineer guy talks about. Ooh, is that it? Is it that short?
Yeah. We did talk about it at previous office hours though, but.
Oh, so the whole post is for paid subscribers. If you are a paid subscriber, this is a great article. He does go into and he talks to a bunch of people at Shopify that moved away from Datadog because their bill for Datadog was in the millions. And, you know, they basically were like, hey, we can spin up a team, and, you know, we can pay them to do our own thing. So there is a scale mark, but it isn't that, hey, you need a team of X amount of engineers to actually run Prometheus and do the deep level APM that you can get. You do the deep level of alerting and monitoring and security automation and like all the various things that Datadog can provide. And I think it is, if you're doing observability at a deep level, if that's what your application engineering team needs to be able to run a really modern application, which it depends on, you know, what does your application team need, then I think building your own is pretty hard. But anyway, good article if those can access it.
I'm going to say we should all go back to Nagios and Cacti.
Never again will I want to look at the Nagios UI and have to click through that. Those were dark days early in my career.
Big brother.
Yeah, just a big brother. Yeah, just be done with it.
Just simple Moonin and Monet were fine for me. Nice and basic.
Oh, I haven't heard Munin or Moonin for a long time.
They were
Anyway.
the easiest ones to install. You just installed them. We use Zabbix heavily. In fact, someone migrated from Zabbix to Prometheus, and it was a big step back because people thought Prometheus is a monitoring system. Like, no, it isn't. It's a metric collector. That's it.
Right, the PCB. Yeah. Sean, I sent you a message.
Okay.
See it, but I'd like to talk to you about what you guys might be doing for an alerting system on your FedRAMP side. So curious what you guys do there. So I might hit you up after that.
Okay, sure.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad to see everyone connecting with each other and getting answers to their questions. This is awesome. Thank you everyone for joining today and participating. Wonderful conversation. We're going to be posting today's session to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/cloudposse. So if you found something you'd like to share with your team, great way to do so. Just look out in a few hours for that video. Next steps, if you haven't yet connected with me, you can add me on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/in/Osterman. Again, linkedin.com/in/Osterman. If you're curious about Cloud Posse or any of the services that we provide and how we can move the needle for you, go to cloudposse.com/quiz. Again, cloudposse.com/quiz. Answer a few quick questions and you'll be able to book a meeting directly with me. Join our Slack team at slack.cloudposse.com. That's slack.cloudposse.com. A lot of our office hours discussions take place in the office hours channel there. Anyways, have a great rest of your week, everyone. See you next week, same time, same place. Take care.
Thanks, Eric.
Thank you.
Good luck.